The Count, as we called him, was an old man. He must have been in his 80s, who came into the cafe where I was a waitress every day. He was rather mysterious, had a Slavic accent, and we thought he must be descended from Russian nobility. We imagined he'd had a wild life when he was young because he was kind of eccentric. He always wore a black top coat and used to laugh to himself alone as he drank cappuccinos. I think all of us who worked there felt a little protective of him. He laughed so much to himself at the cafe that it sometimes irritated other customers. One day, a very annoyed woman who had bought coffee asked me if she was expected to share a table with that strange man. It's a cafe, I said defensively. If it's crowded here, yes, you have to share. My boyfriend, who worked as a waiter in the restaurant upstairs from the cafe, would come down for coffee during free moments and sit opposite the Count, laughing in synchronicity with the old man as he sat at the next table. My boyfriend had a soft spot for the weird and strange people of this world. The Count apparently had a crush on Candy, the wife of the restaurant owner. She managed the cafe because he asked for her every day when she came into work. Sometimes when she happened to be there, she'd sit with him with a cup of espresso and talk to him. He did speak English, not well, but well enough to converse with Candy. I often wondered what exactly they had to talk about. Candy was in her 30s, an attractive brunette with a full figure, and she'd married the Armenian owner of the restaurant upstairs, probably thinking such an act would lead to a comfortable life. I suppose it did. After all, they had a home together in Marin, north of San Francisco, and although she hadn't had kids yet, she seemed happy. The Count seemed to love her. She probably seemed charming and glamorous to him, running the cafe. But one day the police arrived there, two of them, and asked about an elderly Russian man they discovered who hung out at the place. It appeared he'd shoplifted merchandise from a sneaker store. Sneakers! We, those of us who worked at the cafe, couldn't imagine the Count even wearing sneakers. He'd always worn polished brown leather Oxfords. But the police were investigating and wondered if he'd ever stolen from us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Edmonds. I am the editor-in-chief of For Page and Scream magazine. I am here today with Martha Patterson. She's the author of The Count, which we had the honor of publishing in our second issue. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
I love this story. The story is such a great character piece. It all centers around this Count. And I'm so curious, what inspired you to write about this man and the story in general?
Well, part of it's a true story. Over 40 years ago, I worked in a cafe in San Francisco where this rather eccentric old man came in every day, and we all kind of wondered about him. We did call him the Count. But I kept thinking about him all these years later, and all the people at the cafe. Candy really did work there. But I was imagining, what if there was a real mystery to this guy? And the wheels started spinning, and I thought, well, maybe he's a thief. And usually I write that way. Coming up with the first idea can be hard. Sometimes I do get writer's block. But once I have the first couple of sentences, I'm off and running. So there really was a man like that.
That's interesting. I would love to know what his actual life story is too. He's just going to
I
live
don't
in my
even
head.
know. I don't even know. He
Hmm.
was rather odd and unusual, and we didn't know a lot about him.
Well, I'm going to imagine him as the Count as well from now on. This man I've never met makes life more fun. So do you often do that? Do you feel you take ideas and inspiration from the world around you, life around you?
Yeah, all the time. Just conversations with neighbors can give me ideas. I get inspiration from everything. I I read a lot, and that's advice I would give to any writer. I read plays, essays, poetry, short stories. I look at art books. I have a collection of them. I've written pieces of work based on paintings I've seen. I listen to music all day and the news, NPR, and rock, classical, jazz can inspire me. But I think any kind of artist draws from everywhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's so much inspiration and cross-media inspiration. It's so valuable. I agree completely. So do you find that you have any themes that you keep returning to in your writing, or do you like to explore everything?
I've written political plays for children, plays about married couples who are bickering constantly. But I also have a theme I keep returning to, which is romantic kind of dramas. I've written plays and short stories like that. And in fact, one of my brothers said to me last week, Martha, sit down and write a full length novel, a real old fashioned bodice ripper. A modern romantic story of love and money and sex. He said, just write it, because I have read a lot of Victorian melodrama, and he thinks it's something I could do. But you know something, Sarah, writing something of 200 pages is daunting, and I don't know if I have it in me.
I mean, you'll never know unless you try. You definitely have the intrigue part down. I mean, I was intrigued by this story. You get that element in there for sure. Um, and I honestly, it might have been in your bio and I failed to look it over, but I didn't realize that you wrote plays as well. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I've written a lot of them, over 175 at last count. I've written 8 full lengths and a lot of short stuff. The short pieces I write get produced all over the country and around the world, often in festivals, because these 10-minute plays you can crank out in a couple of hours are very popular at these festivals, which are being done more and more around the United States. Sometimes they pay, sometimes they're freebies, but I like getting them produced. It keeps me busy.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Now, have you, in like the past year or so, have you had any of your plays become video plays like through Zoom? I've seen a lot of those popping up. Have you ever had experience
Yeah,
with
I have on my website, I have a monologue that was produced recently. It's a woman talking about a failed romance in a bar to a friend. And what I liked about it was they used a real bar to shoot it in. It's on my website. You can look it up if you have the link. But I've often get DVDs of productions that are too far away for me to go to, so I can see how they turned out.
this might be a silly question, but do you often like how they turned out, or are you watching it and you're like, oh, that's not how I pictured it? Is that a
You
good, bad
know, Sarah, it's hit or miss. Sometimes the lighting is so dim,
thing?
or the actors mess up the lines, or the staging isn't that great. and I end up a little disappointed, but just as often, they're pretty good if they take time with the setup and get the lighting right. Usually, I'm happy with the acting. Most theaters can get reasonably competent actors. And I used to be an actress in New York City, so I'm kind of picky about that. But most of them are pretty good.
Mhm. That's great. That's great. Um, do you, to get back to the issue of writing really quickly, do you find that you approach writing plays differently than you approach writing short stories, or is the process pretty similar?
Um, they're only similar in that once I get the idea, I can keep going. With a play, it's as if it writes itself. I can hear the characters talking, and I usually finish first drafts pretty quickly. With short stories, and actually that's something I've been turning more and more to lately. I've been getting a little bit away from plays because I'm not having as much current success with them. But the short stories, I've been getting a lot done. This one, this is a magazine called the Ravenna Review. I don't know if you can see it. It came out in March, and I have a story in there called Jazz in the Rain. And it's a bi-monthly magazine, costs $8, but they paid me nicely for it. And to me, nice is anything over $100. Nobody gets rich in my business unless they're on the New York Times bestseller list.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's wonderful though. Congratulations with that. That's great.
Thank you. I
I
was very proud that you published The Count
Mhm.
because that's one of my favorite short stories I've written.
Mhm. We were so happy to have it. We love any story that's just got so much personality like that. That's one of our favorite things. It's fantastic. And thank you for submitting to us. We still are, but we were at the time still a very young publication. So we're always shocked when writers with such impressive careers and who have all of this experience and know-how are like, oh, they're submitting to us. We're like, really? Thank you. It's so great. It's the best feeling. Um, so thank you as well with that. That's wonderful. So tell me a little bit about how you got started with writing. What first got you hooked with it?
Well, I wrote as a child. I wrote poetry and stories about animals, and I wrote fan letters to authors of children's books, and sometimes they answered me. But my mother wrote for television decades ago in the early days of TV, and then she wrote a couple of children's novels. So she kind of inculcated to the four kids in my family that writing matters and using your imagination counts too. And I had always written, but I didn't turn to it seriously until I was in my 30s in grad school, where I studied playwriting and started really doing it seriously. That was 30 years ago. And I've branched out. I write poetry now and essays and short stories. I love all of it. I worry about spreading myself too thin, but the fact is, I'm having good luck with my submissions, so I don't intend to stop.
I think that's great policy to have. And I personally find that writing across so many different genres really helps. You learn a lot from all of the different
You
mediums.
do. You
Mhm,
do.
mhm.
I learn about character and structure and plot development from plays, but I transfer that to my storytelling too. Any good short story needs a beginning, middle, and an end. and you usually want some kind of climax or a twist or something mysterious or unexpected happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now. Can we expect next from you?
Well, I just was a finalist in a contest for the city of Boston. I was only a finalist. The winners are going to be on billboards all over the city. And the challenge was to write a story of only 100 words, which is tiny. It's a paragraph about something to do with the city of Boston. So I was pleased with that. Also, I'm trying to market this book, my collection of short stories that was published a year and a half ago. It's called Small Acts of Magic, and boy, is it hard getting a book of your own published. And it wasn't Vanity Press. It's a bona fide publisher. They wanted my writing, and I just got a small royalty check. I'll hold it up again. It's called Small Acts of Magic. And what I learned from a publisher recently was send lots of free copies to people because you can write your ass off to agents, emails and attachments. And he said they don't care. They're worried about getting fired. But he said everyone will read free stuff. So I decided that's something I have to invest a little time and money in and try to market my book more. I've also got a bunch of poetry being published, which I won't go into because that's not really what this is about. But I do like poetry and nobody reads it anymore, but I like writing it.
I love poetry. It's one of our big debates as editors here for
Really?
Page and Screen with poetry because we all love it. We all love it. We all write it, and off and on sometimes, but most of our editorial team had also worked at Marathon Literary Review for Arcadia University. We all went to grad school together, and the poetry submissions, they were wonderful, but we would get 500 plus a submission period, and we're just like, we can't handle that right now. If we were to open poetry submissions, it would be too overwhelming. We'd have to cut down to one issue a year just to
Yeah, that is a lot.
Mm-hmm. So it is always one of our great debates is we want to have poetry submissions, but we're just like, we can't handle it. Not right now. Maybe in the future, hopefully in the future. But tell us a little bit more about your book, your collection. What's it about? What are the stories like in it?
Oh, it's 27 stories, and a lot of them are only 3 or 4 pages. A couple in the collection are longer. They're like 8 or 9 pages, but most of them are short little things that I've been writing for the past 10 years on all different subjects. There's even a bona fide fairy tale in it about a peasant girl who ends up marrying a prince, because that's the kind of junk I read when I was a kid. But most of the stories are very much geared towards adult readers. I don't know how to explain it any better. It's just my book of all the stuff I've been working on for 10 years. And someone said, we want it.
That's wonderful. Congratulations with that. It is, like you said, it's very, very hard to have someone actually embrace your work like that, but it's such a special thing when it happens. Also very hard to encapsulate 10 years of work in just a few words.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand that. Well, you'll have to, the book is also linked on your website.
Yes.
Great.
My website has a list of all the books I've appeared in. I'm in about 20 or 25 anthologies, along with the work of a lot of other people, some of whom I know because I belong to a big network of writers.
That's fantastic. Are you more of a solo writer, or do you get opinions during the process of your writing? You talk about being part of a network. Is that part of your writing process?
I write alone. I can't write with anyone else in the room,
Mm.
but I trade manuscripts with people in my network. It's an internet group of people. One of the networks is called The Binge, and it's just for playwrights. But we're always trading work with each other. But I am not that discriminating. I show my work to my family too, and they're not really writers. But I'll listen to anybody because everyone has read a book, seen a movie, been to a play, and they all have their own taste, and my family does. And if they think a short story doesn't work or has a weak ending, I'll listen to them. Sometimes I throw the advice out. I think, no, I don't agree. But a lot of the time, it's worth listening to, even if they're not a writer themselves, because it's just a little nugget of criticism that can really make a difference if I go back. I love doing revisions. I'm never happy with my first drafts.
I think that's a really good policy to have, getting advice from people who are not writers. I've done the same thing. I have one friend who they put up with me so much. I send them everything that I write. And they write sometimes for fun, but not professionally, and haven't received like formal training or anything like that. And often they'll point out things that I feel a little off or aren't very strong. And having that advice gives me the freedom to work through it in the way I'd like. Whereas in some of the writing groups I'm in, we get feedback that's like, oh, this feels a little weak, you can do this, and there's a suggestion with that. And sometimes that's super, super helpful because I'm like, I have no idea what to do with this. But other
Yeah,
times I prefer the freedom to work through it on my own and have
yeah,
just the general suggestion of, oh, something's not working, not the suggestion of a fix.
yeah. It's all good.
Yeah.
I'll listen to anyone. And they don't even have to be in the arts.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, like you said, everyone consumes media, so everyone knows what a story should feel like.
Some writers aren't like me. They're very protective and they'll only show their work to a few select friends. And that's fine too. That's what works for them, and they trust those people. But I'm a little bit different. I'll listen to most anyone.
I think that's great. Like you're saying, you get so many perspectives on your work, and I think that's a wonderful thing for sure. Um, well, the last question is just a bonus question I've been asking everyone. If you could give one piece of advice to writers out there, what would it be?
I would give advice that my eighth grade English teacher did. We had to read Strunk and White's excellent little book, The Elements of Style, in eighth grade. And my teacher said, when you finish writing something, cut and cut and cut. Omit needless words. Make every word count. And I know someone who studied journalism in school who said she has the opposite issue. She was taught to write concisely. She needs to expand everything when she revises. But I think most people are more like me. Really consider if you need every word that's in that story, because audiences can have short attention spans. And you want to be tight and say exactly what you mean and not overwrite. That would be my advice.
That's fantastic advice. Absolutely fantastic advice. Thank you so much for that and for being here with us today. It's been so wonderful
Oh,
getting to meet you and
it's
talk with
been
you.
so much fun.